Chapter 14. The play was well along, and Anne was oblivious to anything around her as all her attention was centred on the stage. Wesley was glad of that, as he watched how little attention she was receiving from the assembled audience. Or, rather, how much veiled attention she was receiving. At least she seemed to be oblivious to it as she sat enraptured by the spectacle on stage. For his part, he had no idea what the play was about. All his attention was on her and what he could do about her situation. The good news was, she wasn't ruined. No one had given her the cut direct. But no one had stopped by his box to greet her either. The only bright side to that was that he didn't have to plant any of those bounders a facer. If either Sampson or Patterson had wanted to speak with her, he would not have been fully responsible for his actions, he thought with a grimace. Anne had been radiant when she arrived with her aunt at his box at the appointed time. Despite her nerves about being out in public after the debacle the night before, her excitement over finally getting to the theatre had kept her from appearing pale. She was always gracious, so she had politely greeted the other guests he had assembled, and made brief conversation before the curtain had been raised. Since then, she had sat mute in her chair at the front of the box with her attention never wavering from the performance. It was a novelty to see someone actually paying attention to the show. So many of the well-born audience attended the theatre to watch one another, rather than the stage. But not Lady Anne, he was delighted to observe. When the intermission arrived, he watched her blink as though awaking from a trance. He hid his amusement. "That was amazing," she enthused. "Thank you so very much, my lord, for having us this evening. I am enjoying myself immensely." "I'm glad. Would you like me to have a footman fetch you some refreshments during the intermission, or would you like to take a stroll?" He was saddened to see her shrink back slightly in her chair at the thought. "No, thank you. I think I shall just sit here and enjoy the experience." Wesley had a footman go collect a selection of options anyway. He figured the other guests would appreciate some refreshments, even if Anne refused. Most of his guests filed out of the box to stretch their legs for a few minutes. Lady Sophie remained to lend countenance to her niece, but she was entrenched in a conversation with one of her cronies, who happened to be in the box next to his. Taking a seat next to Anne, Wesley engaged her in conversation. "Is it as good as you had expected?" "I really didn't know quite what to expect, so I will say that it is even better than I expected." She answered him with a grin that caused his chest to tighten slightly. He ignored the sensation as best he could. "Is your aunt any more resolved to your father's betrothal?" he next asked, keeping his voice low. Anne's quiet chuckle surprised him. "If by resolved you mean pretending the situation does not exist, then yes." She cast her eyes back at her aunt to ensure she was still not paying attention. "I don't know what to make of it, my lord." She then heaved a quiet sigh. "Why the sigh, my lady?" "I feel dreadful for thinking of myself in the face of my father's happiness. But when everything came crashing down last night, I had been comforting myself with the thought that I can at least return to Rowanwood with my father and make an attempt to repair our circumstances. I feel quite prepared to work hard and turn things around. But now, it seems he intends to do that work with someone else, and I shall be in the way. It rather leaves me with very few options." She looked Wesley in the eyes, and her next question made him feel as though she had punched him in the gut. "Do you think Lord Sampson would be truly dreadful? My heart does go out to all those motherless children." "You are not going to wed the likes of Sampson, my lady. Not if I have any say over the matter." "But you really do not have any say, do you, my lord? You are just my friend, and really, this needn't concern you. I need to arrange a future for myself, and it would seem that my options are narrowing." Wesley was about to reply when the signal came that the performance was about to resume. The others filed back into the box, and Lady Sophie fluttered around and settled next to Anne. No more conversation would be possible. Once again, Anne's attention was snared by the actors on the stage, and she was no longer aware of what was going on around her. It was a good thing, because Wesley's mood took a noted dive as he became aware of Lord Patterson staring intently at Anne. Wesley had no wish for another scene, but he felt himself mentally daring the man to approach. His protective urges toward Anne knew no bounds. As the curtain fell on the final scene, Anne's enthusiastic clapping filled the box. Wesley grinned as the others joined in. Most of them had been caught up in conversations and had barely noticed that the performance was over. Anne's warm smile encompassed everyone nearby as she declared, "Was that not the most delightful experience ever?" Lady Sophie chuckled at her niece. "Not particularly, my dear. Your lack of experience is showing. But that's all right. It is rather endearing." Wesley's heart clutched as he saw Anne's crestfallen expression after her aunt's callous words. Her confused glance met his, and he offered her an encouraging smile. Her chin rose, and he could see her determination bolstered. She ignored her aunt's statement. "Well, I rather enjoyed it, and I am glad we came." As they were leaving Wesley's box, Lord Patterson stepped up unacceptably close to Anne. Even though Wesley was right behind her, he could not hear what the wicked man said to her. He could not bear to see the bounder's hand on her. "I would ask that you remove yourself from my future wife's presence, Patterson. You are not welcome here, and I would demand that you not approach her again in the future." Wesley heard a couple audible gasps, as those around who had heard him processed what he had said. He was happy to note that none of them originated with Anne. She merely looked at him with serious, widened eyes from a pale face. She did not look pleased, but she did not gainsay him either. Wesley had not been led to believe that Anne's aunt was very bright, but she quickly assessed the situation and bustled Anne away from the gathering crowd. The Earl of Sutton quickly took his position next to Wesley, but the show of solidarity didn't seem to be necessary. Patterson looked at the two of them and bowed slightly. "My apologies, Dunbar. I had no idea the wind blew in that direction." "Now you know, so get yourself off." Patterson turned on his heel, and the crowd dispersed with a rumble of disappointment that there wasn't to be more of a scene. Wesley looked around and was disappointed to feel abandoned when he realized Anne was nowhere in sight. "Her aunt got her away before there was any possibility of a crush," the Earl supplied when he saw Wesley's searching gaze. "And might I ask, when did this develop?" Wesley's jaw was cramping from clenching it so tight. "It hasn't, yet. I just couldn't bear to see her evening ruined by the likes of Patterson." "So you announced that she is your betrothed?" Lord Spencer was incredulous. Wesley shrugged and offered his friend a shamefaced smile. "A little bit of overkill, perhaps, but the matter is now settled." "But now you will have to marry the girl." "I know." Wesley was amazed at how right that felt. "How do you think she is going to feel about it?" "Would it make me an arrogant monster to say that she will probably be delighted?" "Yes." The two men shared a chuckle as they left the theatre and proceeded to their club to drink to the future couple's happiness. Anne got very little sleep that night, and was up early, pacing in her room the next morning. She had been unable to choke down much breakfast, and was wringing her hands uselessly when she heard the door knocker sound. She hoped and dreaded equally if it were the Viscount. The footman soon ended her suspense. Indeed, the Viscount of Bracondale had called to speak to her father, and asked that she be summoned shortly. Anne was swept with a wave of fury that put the run to the pallor she had earlier seen in the mirror. She swept down to the receiving room and paced there until she heard her father's voice. "Ah, my dear girl, the butler mentioned you were waiting for us here. How delightful that we shall both be wed before the season is over." Her face felt tight as she smiled briefly at her father. He obviously wanted her to be happy with this development, and she had no wish to disappoint him. He seemed oblivious to her distress. Anne could tell from the Viscount's searching gaze that he was much more aware of her volatile mood. Her father was still talking. "I would assume the two of you have plenty to discuss, so I will allow you a few minutes of privacy." He left the room, leaving the door ajar for a semblance of respectability. "You do not look pleased," Wesley commented, prompting a derisive snort from Anne. "Pleased? No, Lord Dunbar. I am not surprised to hear you say that, as I am decidedly not pleased." She was almost amused by the surprised look that flitted across the Viscount's face, before he once again was looking at her with his impassive face hiding his thoughts. "Would you care to tell me why? I would have thought you would think it the perfect solution." "I have no idea what gave you that idea, my lord. You were quite clear on the subject. You would rather throw me to the wolves than make an offer for me. Well, I would rather be ruined than be tied for the rest of my life to a man that would threaten me like that, and I most certainly do not wish to be married to someone who has been forced into it." "I have not been forced," Wesley insisted hotly, before continuing with his tone cooling. "Would you have rather I left you to the tender mercies of Lord Patterson?" "No, I would have rather you had left it well enough alone. I could have handled him." She paced a few steps away from the Viscount before whirling back to face him. "Don't you see? All I ever wanted was to find a comfortable partner to start a new life with. You have no desire to be married. How are we ever going to be comfortable together?" Anne blinked as she watched the Viscount's impassive expression disappear, to be replaced by one of warm admiration. "I hate to disagree with you, my dear, but I really have to argue with you. While you are quite correct that up until now I have had no desire to find myself leg-shackled, I find I cannot face the thought of you being wedded to anyone else. That leaves me to conclude that I am quite determined to have you for myself." A look of uncertainty crossed his face, much to Anne's delight. "That is, if you will have me." Anne crossed her arms to prevent them from being thrown around him. She tried to maintain a severe expression. "How do I know you are serious?" "I promise you I am absolutely serious. I will promise to give up all my profligate ways. I know you want to live a quiet life, so I will promise we can move to one of my country estates and raise chickens if that will make you happy." Anne chortled. "Chickens?" She wrinkled her nose. "I think they are rather nasty creatures, if you must know." She laughed again. "That was a lovely speech, but I fear you will be bored within a week if I were to take you up on the offer." "No, I swear to you. I shan't be bored as long as you are by my side. Besides, you cannot make me eat my words to Patterson." With another laugh, this time bordering on a giggle, Anne finally allowed the Viscount to take her hands and draw her close. "You don't care a single jot for Patterson, so don't think you can bamboozle me. What must Lord Grey and Lord Spencer think? They will have my head for this." "They shall have to go through me first." Anne gazed at the Viscount with a measured stare. "Are you absolutely certain you could bear it, my lord?" "It is my heart's desire. I swear it to you." Anne finally relented and threw herself into his arms. "Very well, I shall be your wife, but I shan't hold you to your promises of country living, my lord, as I am quite convinced you would go mad. Perhaps we could find a good compromise of town and country." "You are the most managing little baggage I have ever proposed to." She giggled again. "I am the only one you have proposed to, so that's not too difficult." Further conversation was stifled as he drew her in to seal their bargain with a kiss. Epilogue. Anne could barely sit still. Wesley's sigh nearly pushed her over, and a fit of giggles overcame her. "Your fake sighs only serve to make me laugh, my lord," she pointed out. Then they have served their purpose, my dear. Wesley returned her fond gaze. But explain to me again why we were going to ensconce ourselves in the country for a fortnight? For one thing, because you love me, Anne answered with a saucy smile. That I do, but what's the other thing? Anne's sigh was genuine and filled with joy. Because we have friends who would like to spend time with us. Oh, yes, that, Wesley grinned. It is due to the Duke and Duchess of Wrentham that we found each other, and since you've always claimed he was your best friend, you ought to be glad we're going to see him. Really, you could argue that it is because of Sir Broderick that we found each other. He was quite the matchmaker for such a villain, wouldn't you say? That he was. It's a pity he's no longer around to gnash his teeth in despair. I can't imagine one such as him would rejoice with us. They shared another loving glance before Wesley continued with his complaint. You know I have no complaint about seeing Alex and Rose. But do you think they'll require us to call them Your Grace? Anne laughed. It would be the polite thing to do. At least Lord and Lady Sinclair will be there as well, so you shan't be alone. But all either couple will want to discuss is their infants. Wesley's disgust with the coming 2 weeks was evident. That might be true, but you should try to listen closely, Anne answered with a soft smile and a delicate gesture toward her own midsection. Ever sharp-eyed, Wesley's gaze narrowed on his wife. Are you trying to tell me something, or trying to avoid telling me something? Anne laughed, joy clear in the sound. I was planning to wait a little longer, just to be certain, but I'm fairly sure you'll soon be irritating Gray and Spencer with your own conversations. Wesley pulled her into his arms to demonstrate to her just how happy he was with her news. I knew the moment you turned those defiant kitten eyes on me after Alex and Rose disappeared, that you were going to turn my life around. Anne burst into laughter. Turn it on its head, you mean? It needed turning, my dear. It wasn't right until you turned up into it. They could feel the carriage slowing and turning into the drive to Heath, and they faced forward, looking into a very happy future. The end.